Welcome to Inspired Living with Marc Lainhart, the intuitive prospector. Every Wednesday, Marc, along with his special guests, will explore thought-provoking topics and ideas that promote creativity, self-help, healing, happiness, and well-being to inspire you on your spiritual journey. Each week, Marc will discuss different paths to achieving a more spiritual, balanced, happy, and healthy lifestyle. Topics will elevate consciousness and range from metaphysics to the human and social experience and all things spiritual. Welcome to an inspired community that offers support, encouragement, and new ways of thinking. Marc is a tested, certified, and professional spiritual medium, metaphysical teacher, healer, and spiritual advisor with a spiritual practice based in Seattle, Washington. You are the inspired and the inspiration.
And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be in this beautiful, transformative, healing planet of ours. This is Inspired Living Radio. I am your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, live here in my studio in the beautiful, sunny Seattle, Washington, and today is a very special day for me because this is the first time that I've actually been on the air when it's my birthday. So today is the birthday, 49 years around the sun. We're going to have a very special guest to the show that's going to take us prospecting to find all the many diamonds that lie within and the diamonds that are around in life and share his wisdom and his education and his backstory with us in these very transformative times that we find ourselves in. Again, if you're new to the show, thank you for tuning in and listening. We have a global audience all around the world. If you want to follow us, you can go to OMTimes Radio and click on Inspired Living Radio and make sure to subscribe to the show. You can also follow us through many social media platforms from Facebook to Twitter to Instagram. On Facebook, where you can follow our global page under Inspired Living Radio and just ask to join that global community. If you're following us over on Twitter or Instagram, the handle is Inspired for Us. That is the number 4, Inspired for Us. And I'm happy to report that we've been picked up by more platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, iTunes, Castbox, SoundCloud, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Deezer, Spreaker, GeoSavant, and of course the past 6 seasons of Inspired Living Radio over on the OMTimes Radio Archives Library. If you want to work with me directly, you can find me at marclainhart.com or just internet search The Intuitive Prospector. And if you're looking for more shows, you can follow my Monday morning show, Metaphysical Mocha Mondays, through Facebook Live and YouTube every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, followed by the Healing Cafe, where I actually take direct questions, spiritual chats, Q&A, talking everything from psychic, mediumship, spiritualism, healing, transformations, intuition, metaphysics, and all what I say is just spiritual awesomeness. So again, thank you for joining us. I want to just say, I want to just give a shout out to our inspired listeners, but also yesterday was a very transformative day of moving forward with transformations, justice, healing. Just watching the George Floyd murder trial and the justice that was served. We're in changing times in our roaring 20s, and if you've been listening to my shows or following my work, you know that I've been long talking and predicting about not only the transformations that we've gone through in our beginning of our roaring 20s, from politics to pandemics, but also what I envision the great coming together and seeing people come together like I witnessed yesterday from around the globe, regardless of skin color, regardless of religion, regardless of belief system. That was a very powerful, historical, changing moment. And I have to say that there's more transformative, changing moments ahead of us, not only for 2021, which in numerology we call the year of the 5, but in this next decade of our roaring 20s. So buckle up, hold on. It's going to be a ride, but it's going to be a fun ride. And as we transform, it's not always easy to go through these life lessons of transformation, but the caterpillar never gets to the butterfly without going through the cocoon phase first. So with that, I want to welcome our special guest. I'm going to read a little bit about G.P. Walsh's journey. He's a spiritual teacher. He's a speaker. He's a storyteller, especially for our confusing times. And today we're going to be talking a few different topics from non-duality, inner reconciliation, consciousness and science, and where that's taken us, metaphysics, and of course what GP refers to as the original innocence. GP is the son of a schizophrenic mother and an absent father. GP's earliest memory is being tied to his bed to keep him from wandering. Remember, not all who wander are lost. The years of abuse, neglect, and emotional deprivation were offset by natural gift for and love of truth, as well as an unquenchable curiosity about how it is that people really heal and awaken. At the age of 19, he was on the verge of suicide, addicted to drugs, and at the end, his hope. At this dark moment, GP had an extraordinary spiritual experience that was so penetrating that within a few months, his entire life had turned around. He refers to that day as his, quote, night on the bridge, end quote, where he experienced, as he puts it, quote, the original innocence, end quote. GP talks about, from his own personal experience, my experience as a child made the search for truth and healing more than philosophical curiosity. For me, it was a matter of life and death. GP has a unique ability to connect and communicate with people from all walks of life, wherever they are on their personal path. From simply wanting help with uncovering blocks and old patterns, all the way to the deepest existence questions of who we really are and why we are here. He explains simply and beautiful his message of love and acceptance and reminds us all that we are not broken. If you want to learn more about GP Walsh, you can visit him at gpwalsh.com. And with that, very special birthday present for me, because I get to hear all of his storytelling and his wisdom and his knowledge. GP Walsh, my friend, welcome to Inspired Living Radio.
Mark, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
So just a very transformative day today. It's like I said, first time I've been on the air during my birthday. Yeah. The events that happened yesterday, the transformations, the healing, the coming together, along what I talked about, the great coming together. Talk about healing and transformation. I think this is going to be a really good show, and what you bring. But let's start with the night on the bridge and original innocence.
Well, it's one of those spiritual experiences that isn't on your vision board, right? I mean, it's nothing I planned for, nothing I wanted. I didn't have any interest particularly in spiritual things. I was a rock and roll drummer. That was my whole life. Everything I owned, my car broke down with everything I owned in it. I was living in this little place in Wisconsin with the guys in the band, sleeping on the floor. But after 4 years of just being constantly high and becoming increasingly dark and cynical and resentful of everything, this incredibly powerful experience happened. And basically, I'll make it a short story because I actually could talk for about. It's part of a talk I do that lasts for an hour. But the condensed version is I was blitzed out of my mind with a bunch of other people, as I was all the time. Right? I'd play music, I'd play a gig, and get high. That was life, right? And in the midst of that, sitting around with everybody's having a great time, and suddenly I was just seized with this incredible terror. My body was paralyzed. I couldn't move it. The only thing that could move was my eyes. I couldn't even feel it. I didn't know what it was doing. I was worried that it was falling apart or that I was messing myself or something. And my throat tightened up so I could barely breathe. I was just wheezing. My heart was pounding. My head was pounding. And I thought, this is it. It's over. And frankly, I would welcome it. I was welcoming it. Finally, at last. And in the midst of that, I sat there for a while, and then all of a sudden, without any warning, or any kind of input from me, my body got up and walked out the door and started walking. I was completely on autopilot. I had no control whatsoever. I had no idea where it was going. I didn't know nothing. He walked for about 30 to 40 minutes, just kind of turning this way and that. And when it finally stopped, turned right, I found myself standing on this bridge. Now, it wasn't a jump off and end it kind of bridge. It was just a walking bridge, but it was over this incredibly polluted river that was just completely. I mean, it was dead. I mean, it smelled bad. It was all brown. Nothing could live in it. And as I sat there looking at that, because my body had stopped, and my head went down, and that's what I was looking at, as if to say, take a look. I just started going off, right? I was just venting of just how horrible everything was and how horrible people were. And this was 1971. I think the EPA either hadn't been created yet or just was created because the pollution problem in the U.S. was getting so bad. And I'm just going off about how horrible people are and how terrible and all the, we took this beautiful earth and we're destroying it. And I said, and I did the same thing to myself. I don't deserve to live. I took this innocent kid and I made him, and I destroyed him. And in the midst of this tirade, and I was really venomous. I mean, it was just horrible. I hear this voice that says, "Look closer." And it was so loud and it was so authoritative that I had to obey. And I sat there, I was looking down on this river, and I go, "Look at what?" And the voice says, "Look closer. Look really close." So I just focused all of my attention on the water, this polluted, smelly thing sitting in front of me. And suddenly, it was Alice in Wonderland. I started to shrink. Everything around me started getting big. And it kept going. Within a few moments, I was like suspended in space. And all around me, I could see the molecules of the water. And the voice said, "See the water?" And I looked, and it was clear. It was beautiful, H2O. It was, glowing and shiny and stuff. It was beautiful. He says, now look at the pollution. And I looked at the pollution. It was kind of distorted and deformed, right? Ugly. And the voice says, "They're not touching, are they?" And my God, no, they're not. They haven't bonded, have they? I said, no. And if you could find a way to separate them, you'd have the same original, pristine water you always have, wouldn't you? And I was just in shock. It's like, wow, yes, it would be the same original water, untouched. And then the voice says to me, "Greg, that's you." Sorry.
No, that's
that story for 50 years. 50 years, and I can't get that last line out without breaking up. I thought I was doing pretty good at that time.
Thank you for sharing with us. There's so many metaphors there. A bridge over troubled waters, right?
Oh my God,
leaving your old past to create your new journey. Everything that happened to you in your early childhood, which are very formative, which usually can set a pathway for the choices and decisions you make on your early life to realize what happened to me is not who I choose to become. And I'm just, as you were talking, the breakdown usually leads to the breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
And I loved your quote talking about inner reconciliation, where you say, "When I was graced with the profound understanding of the original innocence of each one of us is immediately delivered me from self-destructive, ego-centered behavior and set my feet on the path that eventually led to this inner reconciliation." Where do you think the voice was just your higher self? Was it the big booming voice of God from the sky? Was it your guardian angel? What do you feel, GP, was the that voice to you?
Well, after it had said that to me, the next experience was just like my head exploding. It was just light everywhere. And when I finally found myself back on the bridge, I mean, everything. I was transformed in that moment, and in a couple of months, quite literally, everything had fallen away from me. People have asked me, what was that voice? And ultimately, I don't know. Infinite intelligence. At the time, having grown up in the Midwest, Christian kind of background, it was God, right? Mm-hmm. I never bought the Yahweh version, the warrior God who needed a blood sacrifice in order to appease his wrath. Mm-hmm. But that's how I saw it. Over time, that began to be transformed in me to the point which is the whole point of non-duality. That voice was me, the real me, not the conditioned me that I had believed myself to be, but nothing that I could even imagine. But that was my true self, the true self of everyone. And that seeing that water had never been touched. And that if you separate the pollution from the water, it's not like you have cleaned water. You have the same original water. And that's why I called it original innocence. That sense that the true you has never, ever been touched. The conditioned you has never touched that original innocence. And that's something from that day forward, I could not look at anybody without seeing that. It took many years to understand the whole process of separating the two and even understand what conditioning was. I mean, this is 1971. I live in a little town and grew up in a little town in Illinois. I'm in the middle of Wisconsin, right? This is not this is not the bastion of spiritual thinking. And so I didn't know what conditioning was. I'd never heard these terms. I'd never heard the term enlightenment. I'd never heard the term yoga. So we live in very different times now. So it was kind of this journey of discovery after that to find out what in fact had happened, and to find out what do I do? How do I make this? It was kind of like my quest. Find out how to separate.
I love it.
And eventually, I named it Inner Reconciliation.
Love it. Yeah, I would say dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live. And that discovery, that prospecting, that adventure, soul adventure on that night on the bridge, which, gave you the concept of original innocence. Very powerful stuff. So we're going to go to our first break here. And then when we come back, we're going to pick up this story and continue with Non Duality and talk about inner reconciliation. So our special guest today, G.P. Walsh. You can find more about him at gpwalsh.com. You are listening to Inspired Living Radio, where we like to say you are the inspired in the inspiration. We'll be back here in 2 minutes.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. Host your show on IOM FM, the radio network of OMTimes Media, one of the more recognized brand names in the conscious community, and is backed by the extensive marketing reach of OMTimes. Hosting a show on IOM FM immediately connects you with our extensive dedicated community.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hello, listeners. We hope you're enjoying the shows here on OMTimes Radio. Marc Lainhart here, and host of Inspired Living Radio. And I'd like to invite you to my morning show of inspiration, encouragement, healing, motivations, transformations, and discovering that diamond within. Metaphysical Mocha Mondays, every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, over on the Intuitive Prospector Facebook page and my YouTube channel, Soul Adventures. Dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, and discover that diamond within.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
Do you feel like your emotions are all over the place? That's normal during this abnormal time. There are a number of ways to cope. Maintain a healthy routine, get enough sleep, eat nutritious food, and exercise at least 30 minutes each day. Schedule some time to talk with a friend or family member. And remember, you can always take a few deep breaths to feel more centered.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Inspired Living Radio. I'm your host, Marc Lainhart, the Intuitive Prospector, where we are here live on OMTimes Radio every second and fourth Wisdom Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Our very special guest today to the show for the first time, G.P. Walsh, a spiritual teacher, a speaker, a storyteller for our confusing times. And today we're talking about many different topics. G.P. was just sharing his story of awakening. Doesn't matter where you're at at in the world, even if you're in a small town in the Midwest, awakening can happen anywhere, and especially if you're hearing that big booming voice of, self-awareness, consciousness, that God within. And we're going to be talking about non-duality. We're going to be talking about consciousness and science, and continue the conversation of original innocence, as GP likes to call it. So welcome back.
I'm glad to be here, Mark. This is such a pleasure. That went so fast.
Yeah,
Like, what? 20 minutes? It's over?
I told you, it just cruises by, especially when, time flies when you're having fun, as the old saying goes. But I was thinking, too, when you were talking about the Alice in Wonderland, I've long thought about, because, spirituality and metaphysics, Alice in Wonderland gets a lot of, nods, I guess. And so when you were saying that, kind of, you grew smaller and you're kind of like falling down the rabbit hole, if you will. And I was even thinking about The Matrix. I've long come to believe now that The Matrix wasn't a movie. The Matrix was a documentary based on, unplugging and realizing who you truly are and listening to that voice of them. Because I know a lot of people that are listening to the show, or a lot of people that are around the world, have heard that inner voice. Scripture talks about God within, being a part of God. And so, in a sense, you are talking to yourself as a part of God, whatever your belief system is. But not everybody listens to that voice. In fact, some people run far from it. I know that happened with my journey. Even, a decade later, to be here talking to you, I started to hear the voices of spirit, and I thought, my God, I've gone crazy. In fact, I think I'm schizophrenic. But then you realize, as somebody that, with a lot of, if we have a lot of mental health issues out there today, and I realized that I couldn't self-diagnose myself, right? I wasn't a doctor, but I'm like, well, I can't diagnose myself, so therefore I haven't gone completely crazy. Maybe this is the spiritual awakening that they talk about, where in a sense you do feel a little bit lost, a little bit crazy, a little bit, what do I do from here? So let's continue to talk about this original innocence that, developed on this bridge over troubled water that had you walking away from your past life of, drugs and abuse and, being in rock and roll. They always say sex, drugs, rock and roll. That's the lifestyle you were living.
That's it.
And then, boom, you had the awakening. You heard the voice. You saw the focus. You saw the water separate. And where did you go from there?
Well, at that point, it became a very interesting dichotomy, because I kind of expected at that point, because everything just started flowing so smoothly, right? I mean, the Red Sea was parting, right? I mean, everything was just falling away. It was just so easy. And suddenly I'm back in school, I'm getting A's, and now I start hearing music, and I start writing music. I switch from drums to piano. I mean, it was just extraordinary. But I had a lot to learn. The reality was I was a dysfunctional human being. I had no real family to speak of. I had nothing I could rely on. I never learned anything about anything, just because of the relationship, especially with my mentally ill mother. I was scared to death of girls. I didn't know how to be in a relationship. I mean, nothing in my life actually worked. So on one hand, I'm this totally dysfunctional creature who's talking to God. So what in the world, there was so much I had to learn. There was so much I had to experience. And it started probably in a couple of years after that it became one challenge after another. Very, very difficult time. I got married young. I had 2 kids. We separated. I raised the 2 kids by myself. I had no money. And I'm just in a state of total confusion. Isn't it supposed to be easy now? What's going on? But remember that what the voice said, you have to learn how to separate these two. I had to learn to discern the corruption, the distortions, the pollution, basically. What made it up, and how did it get there, and how is it removed? And, I thought that was really great, but I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to, I was still young. I still wanted to just, life is supposed to be a certain way. But eventually I really submitted to the entire process, and I became very, first I scoured the Bible, and I just had access to all sorts of books, historical books and translations, various kinds of things, because that's all I knew. And it was after I'd completely exhausted that, and I'd practiced spiritual healing and a variety of things, I realized that I'd hit the limit. There was something else missing. And then there was a period of time when let's look at the whole world of psychology and how does healing actually work in this environment. And, looking at hypnotherapy and NLP and Gestalt and all sorts of different practices. And I realized there was something missing there, too. It was essentially psychological and not spiritual. And my entire experience had been spiritual. But for the first time, I understood the nature of conditioning, how we come to see ourselves as we do, the habitual patterns that get programmed into the system that we misidentify as ourselves. And that misidentification is the glue that connects the pollution from the original innocence. Without that identification, that separation takes place. So I began to be on to something. At that point, I ran into the book I Am That from Nisargadatta Maharaj, which was my introduction into the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, or the Indian tradition of non duality. That and Zen Buddhism happened at the same time. And that was the final piece in the puzzle, where I began to see how the whole thing worked and how you actually do separate the two. And that process by which you separate it was paradoxically going completely to the point of totally accepting the conditioning and the system as it is. That is, understanding that the whole nature of the conditioning that everyone receives is simply the nervous system trying to keep you safe. It isn't working against you. It's not trying to self-sabotage. Those are all the appearances to the psychological mind. The reality is that it has just been trying to keep you safe. And when you understand it as such, you realize it's not an enemy. It's not something you have to get rid of. It's not this horrible thing you have to dispossess yourself of. It is simply an overzealous friend. It just learned early on the only way it could keep you safe was to take away from you much of what actually makes you you. And early in life, when you express yourself as you naturally would, of course, kids are totally unpretentious. They're innocent, right? They're just being themselves. But when being yourself gets slammed by the tribe, by your immediate caregivers and the like, as not being acceptable, it's an existential crisis. To be myself is dangerous. And because the nervous system is always going to choose survival over anything else, it'll chew its leg off to get out of a trap, you will end up suppressing, pushing down into the basement all of the natural qualities. And you will create a sense of individuality, a person literally to present to the world that will win the approval of the world and get you what you need. And then later on, as our sense of identity develops, we believe that that person, that fictitious person created by the nervous system to keep you safe, is actually myself. And therein, the pollution and the original innocence have hooked up. Disconnecting those two. And it's reconciling because it's not really a problem in the sense that it's not that you're broken, you didn't do anything wrong. This is the way it works. If you understand the way it works, you can begin to master it. So now I can reconcile between the natural desire of the nervous system to keep you safe and the natural desire of every human being to evolve and grow and be free. And if you look at every experience in your life where a hard decision had to be made, you can recognize that what the struggle you went through was a struggle between safety and freedom. And you don't have to do the struggle. You can reconcile the two. And that was the heart and soul of the discovery. That's how to separate that which isn't you, that is conditioning, from the real you, which was never conditioned.
Wow. That's some good stuff right there. There's some diamonds right there that we're prospecting for today. So I love that. I'm just for our listeners, I'm just gonna read right off your website too, because when I think about non-duality, for me, I almost have to read it a couple times because it's so, the depth of it but the ease of it, is just, and you had a really good definition right off your website. What is non-duality? And you talk about the conflicts and struggles going on in the world are a direct reflection of the inner conflict that lies at the heart of most people alive today. There's a way out of this deep soul disconnect. that has us rejecting ourselves rather than loving ourselves and each other deeply. We do not need fixing. We do not need yet another program for self-improvement. We need to reconcile with our hearts and souls and rediscover the original innocence, a magnificence that is your original innocent nature. And, when I read that, like I said, I read it a few times because it's just, with the spiritual journey, it can be a real struggle. You talked about, doing the work. A lot of people don't want to do the work. Some people think that, spiritual awakening, is rainbows and cupcakes and unicorns and kitty cats. And a lot of that is very true once you get to that point. But, getting to that point, if you're not doing the work, that's a big part, the dark night of the soul, the shadow work, if you will. But, when I started down this journey as well, GP, I always go back to Rumi, what he talked about. And you're touching in on some very ancient wisdoms and philosophies that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. And I remember Rumi saying the cure for the pain is the pain. And I didn't understand it. I was like, what does he mean? Why do I want more pain when I'm already in enough pain from, everything that I've already gone through? And it's interesting, as you were saying that too, I had Don Miguel Ruiz on about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and his new book, The Actor, he talked about this exact thing, how we suppress down our authentic original selves to cope and be in this world and be actors, if you will, or that duality of, and I think that's where there's a lot of unhappiness in the world today and a lot of not people seeing each other for who they are, and, a lot of rejection, a lot of divide in our world. And even with yesterday's events, I keep hearing people talk when it comes to racism and systemic racism, do the work. We all have to do the work so we can start to get to this place. And a lot of people don't want to do the work. It's Amazon. I can type it up and it can be delivered at my door tomorrow. There's my spiritual awakening. I'm done. But it doesn't go that way. And so there's a lot of patience and a lot of discipline. And again, the transformation process is not easy. But as I remind our listeners, the butterfly doesn't take flight without a great struggle in the cocoon phase. It's the struggle that sharpens the wings. So never pull a caterpillar out of a cocoon early. Let it struggle to get out so it can take flight.
Yeah, don't think you're doing it a favor.
Yeah, you're not. You're actually doing it a disservice by pulling it out early. And sometimes timing is divine, right? And I just, as we move forward with what I keep talking about, the great coming together, I always go back to the flower reference that we're all blooming. You don't see flowers competing with one another. They just bloom, and they are just being human, flowers. And we need to bloom. We need to be human beings and start to see each other, versus dividing each other and being, what society is right now. It's a little eye-opening, but transformation usually is. As Carl Jung talked about, you don't come to consciousness again without pain. So we're back to this pain conversation. The cure for the pain is the pain, and you don't come to consciousness without pain. And for you, as your journey, as this all shifted for you, and you also had acceptance, right? Because a big part of that is acceptance. And Tolle, Eckhart Tolle talks about, awareness is the greatest agent for change. Was it easy to accept all this, or did you fight it for a long time? I fought mine for 2 years, just so you know.
Well, it came in layers, It wasn't like, I fought it for a while and then it was over. I'd fight it, and then I'd finally surrender, and then you're down at another level, and you fight it, and then you surrender, and then you're down at another level, until I was actually getting down to the roots, where the struggle could finally end. Because there's layers and layers of that false sense of self that gets created early on. And layers upon layers of it, right? Because the real you that's been, sent down to the basement, it's not allowed to come out, has gotten layers of behaviors and assumptions and ideas and concepts laid on top of it to keep it hidden. And so, when you start the journey back inward to get back to that original innocence, to the real you have to go through all of these layers. And you get through one and you find that there's another. Fortunately, it's a finite number, and you can do it in a lifetime. It doesn't take forever. So, yeah, I mean, some of it was just ego. Some of it was ignorance, right? I just had kind of expected at this point everything would start working for me okay. Right? And when it didn't, I first figured I must be doing something wrong. I must not be understanding this. And then I would have to dig in some more, and then I would understand more, and the ignorance would be replaced by understanding. And then I could see clearly, okay, I see what's going on. And in the seeing came a surrender to it. And there was a surrender that would start with just the seeing, just the understanding, and it would sink into the heart. So there was the deep desire to surrender. And then finally that desire would permeate the rest of the system, undo the conditioning, and then the surrender would be total. It would go through the entire body. And at that point, the body and all that's involved in the body, the whole nervous system, was now serving that higher purpose. Because even when you realize the higher purpose, the conditioning is still there. It's still serving the old version of yourself. This is what gets confusing. So to really, it's not even you that's resisting.
The ego's a powerful thing, though.
Well, it is. It is, but it's part of the survival mechanism. It's part of exactly the same thing. The ego isn't a real thing. It's not like this little hairy thing hiding in the bushes going to jump on you and mess up your life.
Oh, but it's so easy to blame on our ego. We can blame everything away on the ego, right?
Well, and to a certain extent,
we at least try to.
Yeah, a certain extent it's true, but we have to understand what it is. All it is all. The ego is nothing but the sum total of all the thoughts of I. And that sense of I that developed as the defense against what was happening to you, mostly when you were young, and to create a persona that would be presented to the environment to make sure you got what you need. That's the ego. It's not a real thing. It's not a being. It's not an entity. It is simply that which has been believed for so long that it's operating as if it were true in the nervous system. And seeing that it isn't true and who you actually are, and that the ego is made up of nothing but a bunch of thoughts, is the key to beginning to dismantle it and seeing how it operates in the whole nervous system. And seeing it is how you become free from it. Because even those thoughts, even all those thoughts of resistance, or feelings of resistance, they're not you. They're part of the conditioning.
Wow. I think that's a great stopping point, because we'll go to our second and final break. And when we pick back up, we'll come back and we'll finish this very enlightened conversation that we're having with our special guest today, G.P. Walsh. Thank you for just sharing and storytelling. And when we come back for the last part of the show, we're going to pick right up where we leave off here in another 2 minutes. So stick around. We'll be back here on Inspired Living Radio.
The cutting edge of conscious radio. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Have you wondered how to change your love paradigm? The secret key is finding a love partnership, not just a regular connection. How do you find these? Through conscious relationships. Ascending Hearts Dating is a dating site for people like you that believes in second chances and a different type of spiritual connection. Try Ascending Hearts for free at ascendinghearts.com and change your love paradigm. Ascending Hearts, the premier dating community for the spiritually awake.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
One planet, 7.3 billion people, only one you. Life offers us many opportunities and learning experiences. Are you ready to explore and discover this beautiful planet, the life and energy all around us, the spiritual world, and what is unseen, along with your own personal soul adventure? Marc Lainhart,
The Intuitive Prospector is the spiritual connection you have been prospecting for. Internationally known as a tested and professional clairvoyant medium and spiritual advisor, Marc's work as a metaphysical teacher, medical instructor, radio show host, inspirational writer, and hiking guide are here to help you on a journey of self-discovery, healing, inspiration, education, and a whole lot of spiritual awesomeness. Dare to dream. Dare to explore. Dare to live. For more information on Marc's spiritual practice in Seattle, Washington, please visit marclainhart.com or internet search The Intuitive Prospector.
If I could be you.
And you could be me?
For just 1 hour.
If you could find a way.
To get inside.
Each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
And welcome back to Inspired Living Radio. I was just listening to that last ad, and that's so true. You know, walk a mile in somebody else's shoes for perspective. And I was thinking, I got to update my ad. It's 7.3 billion. I've been on the air for so long, it's actually up to 7.8 billion people around the planet. But we're back with our special guest today, G.P. Walsh, talking about so many great things from, consciousness, original innocence, non duality, inner reconciliation. GP, welcome back. And I just want to jump right back in, and pick up where we left off, because could you say that about the ego again? I thought that was really great information and knowledge to share about our accumulation of thought.
Yeah, well, to understand, that's what it's all about. If we understand something, you become its master. We have the idea that the ego is like this thing, right? this horrible thing. It's the modern devil. It's trying to mess us up.
I even named it.
Yeah, but in fact, all it is a collection of thinking. They're patterns of thought. Everything in the universe, every object you look at is a pattern of energy, right? It's a form of energy. The energy is condensed into a particular form. The mind, the ego are no different. They are just patterns of thought. And like everything else in the universe, as it develops into a particular form. The form that our sense of self develops into when we are young is simply one that is best suited to survive in the environment in which you're born. The water simply takes the shape of the container you put it in. And in this case, that sense of identity, which is perfectly adapted to the environment in which you grew up in order to be able to survive, becomes the sense of self. As we get older, we lose touch with the original innocence, and when the sense of identity develops, it develops within that container. So we think that's all there is to us, is what is in that container. And that sense of I is the ego. It is nothing but a bunch of thoughts. And because it's not a thing, it's just thoughts, it becomes very easy to dismantle it by just looking at every thought. Does this thought refer to a sense of a separate self, limited, mortal, struggling, lacking? Or does this I refer to my original innocence? It becomes a very clear way to discern what this particular I, when we use the word I in our minds, what it's referring to. Is it referring to the real you, or is it referring to the imaginary you? With that little yardstick, it becomes very easy to begin to dismantle this complex of thoughts and feelings that is the ego.
I think, therefore I am. Know thyself. So for our listeners out there, how would you, maybe somebody's just having this first night on their bridge. Maybe they're, crossing their bridge and starting to, have this original innocence awakening. What would you say to, those that are just awakening, those that are been on this journey for maybe a few years, and those of us that have been on the journey for many, many years, because there's always something to learn in this journey of transformation. I always say once growth stops, decay begins, and we're such capable of evolving, right? Because we breathed liquid for 9 months before we were born, and now we're breathing air. So I always, look at the next journey as just another step on, consciousness, or as Tesla talked about, secrets of the universe. You think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. What would you say to our listeners out there based on where they're at on their journey and how to move into, healing and that we are not broken? Because I think there's a lot of people out there, especially this last year and a half. I think a lot of people out there do feel broken or lost or alone or even scared. I always say fear is false evidence appearing real, but what would you say to those listeners?
Well, to truly understand how it is that you're not broken. And when I say that, I'm not just giving a nice little spiritual platitude that you can try to chant or to turn into an affirmation. Let's look at it very carefully. The whole energy system that developed in order to keep you safe functioned absolutely perfectly. And I know it functioned perfectly because you're here. You're not dead. You're here listening to me, right? Which means it worked, which means it isn't broken. Right? It's just operating in a way that is no longer useful to you. It is no longer serving your interests. It was programmed to operate in an environment which does not exist for you any longer. But your whole energy system simply has to get the message: the war is over. And that's the process. The spiritual awakening usually starts as some kind of a deep insight, an aha moment, or an experience of oneness, but then it's got to move south, because very rarely in all of history has that sudden insight, that sudden seeing of something you hadn't seen before, that feeling of oneness, completely eradicated all of the collected conditioning of multiple lifetimes. Very rarely has that ever happened. So for the most part, for most of us, there's the initial insight, and then there's the process of integration. There's the process of actually allowing it to move south into the heart and then finally into the body, where then the entire form, the entire life of the human being becomes a manifestation of the divine one. This is what the word sage means in Indian. A sage is not somebody with wisdom. It is wisdom appearing as a human being. And so with that connection to your reconnection back to that original innocence, which is God, the sense I am, it is now that energy that is moving the entire body, and it's no longer the egoic mind. And so wherever you are along the path, at whatever stage you happen to be, the number one place to start with is what I simply call the yoga of allowing. To simply allow yourself to feel what you're feeling when you feel it, without judgment, without any agenda, without, I got to fix this, I got to get rid of this feeling. Oh, if I just get rid of this negative emotions, I'll have everything I want. There are no such thing as negative emotions. They're only natural feelings that have gotten bad press. So I refer to them as angels in the basement. What you're calling the negative parts of you are actually the best parts of you that got suppressed and sent to the basement all that time ago because they didn't have any permission to thrive or play in the sunshine in the environment you were in. They're not negative. And depicting them as negative is how it has managed to keep them under wraps. Because if they're negative, you don't let yourself feel them. They're not. They're you. And this kind of willingness to be with yourself, to be with your feelings, no matter what they are, whether they be pleasant or unpleasant, difficult or not, without a story, to just simply feel them, is what actually begins to open up the space. Because what happens is the parts of you that have been suppressed, when you allow yourself to feel them and stop fighting them, it gets the message, I'm safe. Oh, it's okay to feel this. This energy can begin to come out. And it was the absence of safety that created the suppression in the first place. The only cure, the only way to liberate yourself is to recover and recreate within yourself the one thing you didn't have when you were a child, and that is total self-acceptance and love. For whatever happens to be there, no restrictions, no agenda, no judgments. That feeling is there, it's allowed to be there. That just communicates safety and love. And in safety, in the environment of safety, is the complete opposite of the environment in which it got programmed in the first place. But because of the incredible nature of the nervous system, which is the most highly adaptive thing that's ever happened in the universe, it will immediately begin to adjust itself to the safe environment. This is what we would call superficially as healing. From the outside, it looks like healing. From the inside, what it is simply the Tao flowing once again, the natural energy of the system beginning to flow into its natural channels, out of its defensive posture, and into its primary job, which is self-expression.
Well, yeah, the nervous system, with my background in medicine and sports medicine, the nervous system is so amazing. And everything you were just describing there from a medical term, you've got fight, flight, or freeze, and the three aspects of, what real true fear is, like the fear that you felt on the bridge that you couldn't move. There's that freezing, and then we get into the fight or flight, mechanisms of how we survive, and, that homeostasis, which is that center balance, which is, that healing that you're talking about, and the nervous system being in its natural state without having to fight or flight. But it just shows you how powerful that mind can be, right? And what I love about what science is teaching us, last month I had a professor from Stanford on, and we were talking about neuroplasticity and how we were once taught that the brain, couldn't rewire itself or rethink itself after a certain age, and that we were kind of stuck with this way of, self-identifying in these thoughts that you're, sharing with us today. And science is, as we move forward, science is showing us a lot of things that were not correct, and that we do have the ability to rewire, and we do have the ability to look at ourselves in different ways and to find that diamond within that authentic self. And for our listeners out there, if you want to go to GP's website, which is gpwalsh.com, he actually has this Angels in the Basement, which is a free ebook that you can click on, and it says click here to meet your angels. So I'd recommend our listeners to go to his website and get that free ebook and recover your deepest self and your greatest gifts, because I believe, GP, that's where we're moving forward. That's what we're moving into in our roaring 20s, is this transformation and this great awakening that people have been talking about, for a few years now. And Angels in the Basement. That's a great reference to. We want to bring our angels out of the basement and into the light and make this just a better, loving place. Take care of our planet, take care of our people, take care of our society, everything that we need to do. So with that, GP, great site. I noticed that your website was done by somebody in Seattle, Washington. That caught I was like, oh, Seattle, Washington. But you've got the, great work, great website.
I live in Seattle as well. I just realized you do too. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I'm over in West Seattle. I'm on the accidental island now that the bridge has been broken down. But I love your website because it's very smooth. It's got a nice, easy flow to it. You offer private sessions. You have courses and workshops coming up, which you call the Om School. And then, of course, you have the Heart Shop, which is meditations, musics. So make sure to check out GP's website and start that prospecting, start that journey of, non-duality and inner reconciliation, and whatever journey you're on. Everybody's always in a different place. And a lot of us that have done the work, from hypnotherapy to biofeedback to counseling to, we're here to share our stories and inspire you and help you to, go through these doorways of opportunity and transformation. So, just with just the few minutes we have left, GP, what I always like to ask my guests to the show, who or what inspires you?
Well, boy, there's been so many over the years. Right now it is my own teacher, my master, Muji, that many people may have heard of. And having, there's no substitute for having a real, honest-to-God spiritual teacher, guru, as it were. And guru's got a lot of meanings. It's simply Sanskrit, and it means simply one who expels darkness. That's all it means. A guru can be a book, it can be a friend, it can be a teacher, it can be anything. It is just that which pierces through the darkness of our own ignorance and reveals to us who we really are. That ever lovable, ever loving, ever valuable, infinitely valuable true self, which you already are. That original innocence has never been lost. This is the great realization. This is enlightenment. It's always been true. In addition to Muji, there's Ramana Maharshi, of course, Nisargadatta Maharaj, which was my introduction to Non Duality, the various forms of Zen Buddhism. I've done lots of study of Buddhist sutras. For me, the most significant ones have been the Heart Sutra, and a very little one known as the Lankavatara Sutra, which really kind of get me to the heart of what Buddhism is all about, especially Zen Buddhism. And we live at a time when there's just unparalleled access to information. And I just encourage people to check it out. Get help. Get a guide.
Yep, I agree with you. Well, GP, thanks for coming on Inspired Living Radio. Thanks for sharing your time, your greatest commodity with me on my birthday. What a really special birthday present. Again, you can check him out at gpwalsh.com. Thank you, my friend. We'll be back again with another episode of Inspired Living Radio. Until our next soul adventure together, be kind, be caring, be compassionate, and most importantly, dare to dream, dare to explore, dare to live, and discover that diamond within. Take care, everybody. Have a great week. Namaste.